These are high performers that are struggling harder because they're high performers, because they're leaders, and they believe that helping others and serving others needs to be prioritized over their own health and well-being. Doesn't mean you have to share all of your life traumas with other people, but just openly acknowledging, that life is struggle and that change and uncertainty in this crazy world we live in means we're going to be struggling. And the harder we're pushing and the more we're achieving and the more we're serving others, the more we need to be supported in return.
Welcome to The Change Effect, the podcast that helps you turn life transitions into powerful new beginnings. One story, one shift, one breakthrough at a time. I'm your host, Noelle Van, an author, leadership coach, and change strategist who spent years in corporate America helping innovators and leaders break through barriers to create success on their own terms. I now work with women to step into change to create a life they love. Whether you're putting yourself at the center of your own story, redefining success, or making a power pivot in your life, career, or business, you're in the right place. Each week, we dive into conversations with trailblazers, changemakers, and everyday women experiencing the ripple effects that come from overcoming the fear and doing it anyway, providing actionable steps, practical strategies, and a whole lot of fun along the way. So if you're ready to step up and become unstoppable, buckle up and let's get started. The environments that shape our success can leave us different on the other side, and growth comes from fully stepping into who we've become because of them. Today's conversation brings that evolution into focus. It's about building a career inside a highly structured system and the transformation that happens when you take the risk of opening up and sharing your experience. Strike Stevens began her career in the military, stepping into a world defined by structure, hierarchy, and high expectations. Over more than 2 decades, she rose through the ranks of global leadership, leading large-scale organizations, advising senior leaders, and developing results in environments where precision and performance were non-negotiable. But alongside that professional trajectory, she was navigating something deeply personal. At a time when the military was only beginning to open conversations around mental health, Strike made the courageous decision to share her experience with postpartum anxiety and depression. What followed was unexpected. Her willingness to speak candidly didn't diminish her leadership, it deepened it. It created new opportunities, new visibility, and a different kind of credibility rooted not just in performance, but in truth. That same conviction carried into her broader impact. She co-founded a 500-plus person volunteer initiative focused on removing barriers to mental health and resiliency for service members, veterans, and their families, working alongside senior leaders, partners, and policymakers to drive meaningful system-wide change. It's a reflection of how she leads, not just within systems, but in service of evolving them. That evolution happening within the very system that shaped her is what makes her story so powerful. Today, Strike brings that lived experience into her work as a speaker, leadership coach, and advisor, helping leaders operate with clarity, courage, and grounded self-trust, especially in high-pressure environments where identity and performance are often tightly intertwined. We talk about what it really takes to grow inside a system that both shapes and challenges you, how personal adversity can become a catalyst for stronger leadership, and what it looks like to carry that transformation forward into your next chapter. This is a conversation about resilience, evolution, and what becomes possible when you allow your experience, not just your achievements, to lead the way. Strike, it is so wonderful to have you here with us. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful to be here with you today.
So, Strike, first of all, we typically get started just to kind of dive into a little bit of your background, and you can start wherever you want. I know you started your military career fairly early, but give us a little bit of a background before we get started.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially as it relates to the subject of change, I think I laughed when you and I had our first conversation because we didn't talk about like one singular change. We talked about how life is this iteration of change. And for me, I grew up on the West Coast in kind of Nevada, Northern California, and I had a lot of change, a lot of turbulence in my life pretty young. And went to school, went to college, and was one of those people who was working 3 jobs to make it through college. My first paycheck in the military, I remember standing there and I got emotional because it was the first time I'd ever made that much money, and I'd been working 3 jobs and I was only doing one. And it was just this game-changing moment. I had medical insurance, like life just suddenly became something very different early on. And then I stepped into from this kind of turbulent life of, struggling through and trying to find my way and often failing my way into whatever I was going to do next, into this incredibly rigid structure of the Air Force in my case. And I worked in aircraft maintenance. I always tell people think Rosie the Riveter, but not the one you probably can see her behind me, not the one with the pretty hair and makeup. If you've ever seen the Norman Rockwell, it's like hydraulic fluid smeared on her face and a rivet gun in her lap, and she's like eating a sandwich that came out of her pocket. That was those were my people. That was my world, and something that I was so grateful to be a part of for over 20 years. And towards the end of my career, I did a lot of work in the mental health, suicide space, wellness space, and worked integration and cross-functional work in a lot of different arenas, both for national security and in that mental health space. And so when I stepped out of uniform, another huge transition, I did a lot of consulting and advising work, both in aviation and other technical spaces. But I also got very involved in leadership work and coaching and working in the veteran space, and found that some of those same threads and some of those same struggles and navigating change and uncertainty was one of the biggest themes I've seen in my post-military career, and also for me, navigating, figuring out who I am in that space and figuring out how to contribute has been another huge evolution in my life. So, yeah, grateful to share anything or expand on anything that you guys would like.
Well, it's great because just the way you describe it too is kind of going through different phases within the career that then brought you to the next. It almost feels like as we were talking about the unfolding of your story, it's
Yeah.
you kind of one thing led to another, to another, to another, and these were experiences that sort of took shape as you
Oh, yeah.
developed more and more and developed your voice and developed. So I know that you talk about sharing some personal struggles that you had. Give us a little bit of just kind of lead up to that and kind of then how that transpired within your role.
Absolutely. So I was talking to a colleague the other day, and in my career, I always say I worked in aircraft maintenance, but I was a leader and an officer, and I came into that role very early in my career. And we were all the things to the people, and in the management of the operations we were guiding. We were the HR. We were the people helping manage people's lives and helping them step through struggle and challenges. We were helping develop them as leaders, and we were working through the technical aspects. And so throughout my career, mental health and suicide, unfortunately, was a theme in my own career. I had lost people. I had helped people navigate some struggle in those areas. But after I had my son, so my kids are much younger. My husband and I we're both military active duty for over 20 years. He's still serving. And we were 14 years in when we had our first kid. And we'd struggled for about 10 years with infertility and miscarriage. And for the year after I had my son, I struggled unlike anything I'd ever experienced, and later on realized I had suffered suicidal thoughts. I was dealing with severe anxiety and depression and just didn't see it for what it was, even though I had been this advocate and this person working in that space through a different lens. It took me a long time to figure out what I had truly gone through, and it took me a long time to get help. And I was actually writing. My husband was deployed to the Middle East, and I was in a command position in maintenance, and I was writing to him. I'm somebody who writing helps me unpack my own thoughts. We were writing back and forth as I was working with somebody to try to help share a bit of my story with no intent of ever sharing what I wrote. And at the end of it, my husband said, "Look, what you've written could really help people. And if you ever feel like sharing it, I think you should." And he's always that person that gives me those nudges and supports me in some of the craziest, scariest things I've ever done. And that falls at the top of the list. And I had a boss I often share a conversation with two scotches on his front porch where I had said, "Hey, we're thinking about sharing this, but this is me in a command position. I had just put in for a really prestigious job in the Pentagon that he had supported me through, that we were both pretty sure that this could destroy those chances, but also that it could help people." And I remember sitting down with my boss going, "Well, there's a lot of risk for both of us, but we think it's worth it. Are we really going to do this?" And being supported in that was an incredible thing. And realizing, stepping into that, I shared an article that shared my experience from a very firsthand perspective with, the messy, ugly parts, I think, exposed a bit more than people were used to, especially from an actively serving military commander. And the response was incredible. And the people that I connected with after that point, instead of losing opportunities and credibility, although there were people that, maybe judged and did have those stigmas, I was able to lead and work in a capacity after that point to help lead efforts, at the service level and higher, to try to change the way we approach some of those subjects in the military, which was an incredible opportunity, and had some leaders that really stepped forward and helped transform the way we view suicidal ideation, view mental health in some pretty amazing ways. So,
That's such a I mean, that's such a success story of putting yourself out there, right? I mean, and I can only imagine we always think, and this is funny because I was writing about this morning, that, when people share their experiences, and everybody does it more now than they ever have done before, right? So there's vulnerability wherever you look. However, that moment before you do it moments in time just stop because you're really you think that it's the biggest deal in the world, which to you it is because it's about your career, it's about just how people view you, it's all of those things. But then to be on the other side of it, I mean, how did that feel once that, like, you, once you saw people, like you said, you had people that you looked up to that were now like, just, they were responding in ways you weren't necessarily expecting them to even come forward and respond.
Yeah. So, yes, it was surprising and impactful for me to not, I was sure I was going to lose my job. There were a lot of things that I was sure were probably going to happen and had already processed and come to terms with. So, it was wonderful to not have that happen. I think the more impactful moments were people sharing their stories with me in return and in very different ways. I will never forget the moment I turned my phone back on. I actually turned my phone off for about 8 hours the day the story released. I told my boss, told my husband, was like, "You aren't going to reach me." And I sat in a tattoo chair at a tattoo parlor getting something that reminded me of it. But it was like avoidant. I was like, all right, this was scary, and let me just pretend it never happened. And I don't want to see the response. I got to just brace myself for this because it's going to be one person I help and I'm never going to hear from them. And I just kept telling myself that. And I turned my phone back on at the end of that day. And I still remember, I mean, it was text messages, it was emails, it was all of these things. I still remember one in particular. I remember many of them, but one was somebody I'd worked with very closely, this gruff, amazing but hard edged person. It was just a total badass. And he shared his experience with me. And his story, along with many others, were people who had attempted to take their own lives and never told anybody, or had struggled and gotten out of the uniform because they thought that was the only way they could get help, or were still struggling and just felt like they were alone. And it was like this spark in this moment where everybody kind of saw each other, or I saw these thousands of stories coming my way, and that shifted perspective in a bigger way. It was, well, these are leaders and badasses and athletes and all these amazing business people. Some of them I didn't even know were reaching out and sending me these things that were deeply personal. And I think it just shifted perspective and went, wow, this isn't just, I'm a person who struggles and they're going to judge me, but like, I just got to help those struggling people. These are high performers that are struggling harder because they're high performers, because they're leaders, and they believe that helping others and serving others needs to be prioritized over their own health and well-being. And then we all kind of collectively over the course of those next few years realized we can actually do both and we can serve each other better by doing it a bit more openly. Doesn't mean you have to share all of your life traumas with other people, but just openly acknowledging, that life is struggle and that change and uncertainty in this crazy world we live in means we're going to be struggling. And the harder we're pushing and the more we're achieving and the more we're serving others, the more we need to be supported in return. And that was a light bulb moment for me for sure.
Well, and the thing that's wonderful to know is that somebody like you who took that step and kind of taking the leap and doing it the first time, and then of course you dove in and you've been helping at a much deeper level because of it, I'm sure, after that. But when you think of the environment that you were a part of for so many years, I always think of it as, you have society and the way that we view vulnerability, right? But then the military, I think, it's a bit of a different animal. I mean, it's that, is there permission to do that, right? Because it's a very primitive, I don't even think that's the right word to use, but like it's a permission driven or I don't know, there's structure around it and protocol and all of those kinds of things but that's why it's so wonderful to hear somebody like you that's able to penetrate that and actually open minds and that's moving in a more positive direction. And do you feel like that has been more recent? Do you feel like that has been something that's opened up over the past, I don't know, 10 years more so than
Yeah.
before? Because when did this happen? When did you share?
This was, I mean, we're coming up on, it was just post COVID. So we were in the 2020 timeframe, 2019, 20, it was really 2020 when this came out. And I think some of the bigger shifts we saw is probably in the last decade that there were really big intentional shifts. And the first one was stigma breaking. And oftentimes the military can be at the leading edge of some of those things because we have diverse teams, we have people struggling. There are some aspects of the military that are well past this. Some of our special operations and first responder communities, they get it because on the outside and in, they understand they're facing traumas, they're dealing with difficult things every day. The stigma breaking comes first, but then I laugh when you say, that sounded like a success story because at the point when I shared my story, I had agreed to be a part of this mental health campaign and I was completely I said yes. I'm one of those people that says yes to things and then I'll figure out later because it's going to give me that pressure I need to do this thing I know I want to do anyway. And then they came back and said, the media teams came back and said, okay, but as you're recruiting people to be a part of this campaign, can you just make sure they're success stories? Because we don't want people to get the wrong idea and we need them to hear that, they had successful mental health stories. And their definition of that was I had a problem. I went to, we called the mental health clinic and they fixed me. And then I went back and everything was great. And I went, whoo, because my story is one of avoiding help and not talking about it. And my story is not a success story, and most people's aren't because mental health struggle isn't some easy thing like I broke my arm, go put it in the splint, we're good. It doesn't work that way. I think about, in that 5 to 10 year range is when we started to let some of those messier stories come out, or people started to talk about it a bit more, or it wasn't just some person who had served 10 years ago telling their story when there's no risk. It was people, there were 4-star generals saying, I made a mental health appointment. There were people talking about alcohol use and how they were becoming sober because that as a coping mechanism is difficult. And they were talking about it while serving. And that was a shift that was game changing because there's risk there. And that's when you actually see the institutions make changes and we start to identify the barriers to getting help because there were instances during that period where there were people reaching out to me or whole communities reaching out to me saying, hey, we see the changes you're trying to make. And this was when I was responsible for those changes in DC at the Pentagon. But our community can't actually do that because this policy or this problem would actually lose us our jobs or our ability to serve just by acknowledging that we want to talk to somebody. And so that gets uglier and messier. And when bureaucracies are involved and institutions are involved, it's a lot harder. Where we've seen some incredible transformation is in the veteran space because now you're just serving people in a different capacity, but you have to be able to look at it, you have to be able to acknowledge that there are some ugly, messy problems that there's no easy answer to, and that there's no simple success stories. And we have to look at the messier ones because that's where we start to make changes that make a difference for people. And again, those leaders and those high performers and those people that we want to act like they've just got it all together, that's where the risk is really being held and held back behind those quiet moments where people feel like they can't say anything. That still is a problem, but we've seen some beautiful changes and some real attempts to shift that narrative over the course of the last 5 years, 5, 10 years.
I mean, you bring up a really good point because when I think about, and when I think of success story, I think of like the fact that when you put yourself out there and you're able to see what that can do for the broader population of people, right? It's kind of like that ability to translate, kind of like what you said. It was like, it wasn't really about me. It was then about how am I going to serve and how am I going to be helping other people? So to me, because I always think of it as like when we talk about things that we get scared to do, and especially when it's around mental health or any kind of, I spoke about addiction early in my sobriety, and that was terrifying, terrifying, because it was like, what's going to come back? What's that going to make me look like? And it's actually the opposite than what you think, because people are actually, they relate to it. So I just think it's such an interesting, but what I was going to say is I always tell people, look at the way that transpired. And did that come out? Was that a good outcome? I would say. That's kind of it's a good result coming out of something that feels terrifying and scary.
It is, and facing, I think it's those terrifying, scary things that actually lead us to a better, lighter version of ourselves. Because I go, man, that was the scariest thing, and I saw it as taking on a burden. And people will often be like, God, isn't it? How do you protect yourself? And it must be this burden to talk about and share these things. Because I'll stand on a stage and share some of these stories, particularly other people's stories that have given me permission to share those. And I go, there is no burden in suddenly people connecting and realizing that they don't have to carry the weight of just like buffering themselves from other people and hiding version parts of themselves. No, we all get better and get through the tough stuff together a lot better off than we do when we're putting all these walls up to avoid the struggle.
So what I was going to ask about the next phase of things. So you get out there and you're in the mental health space, but that was a little bit further on. Was that more, or had you been working in the mental health space before that because of just your role, right?
I think my role, I early in my career lost, I was barely 6 months in when I lost my first person that worked for me to suicide. And it was hugely impactful to me. His name was Isaac Guest. He was a young guy. He wasn't, in his early 20s. And and it rocked my world. And I became very close with his family, close with the situation in ways that were very changed the way I led as a person. And so it was something I always spoke about. And there were so many others after that that had equal impact to me. And I think my perspective shifted throughout that time. I was always a voice for it, but I think a lot of what I wrote about was I think those assumptions that are made of what it'll look like, what it'll sound like, especially from those people closer to you. And my husband and I having that conversation back and forth where it started was, well, what did it look like to you? And me going, but this is what it felt like to me. And both of us were so far from each other's expectations. And it was a learning thing. And some of it for me was a risk avoidance. Okay, if I ever look like, how do I prevent this from ever happening again? Because I wasn't sure and I knew we wanted to have more kids. And I never had any other postpartum issues, but I also realized my issues weren't postpartum so much as they were that cumulative effect of life and stress and all these other things. And having a kid adds a lot to those stressors. I truly think that shifting the narrative and where it became something really meaningful to me, I was put in a position where I was able to share a perspective from both sides of it, where I was able to hold space for people to be able to share their own experiences and just understand that it's ugly, it's messy, and it's different for everybody. And and just holding space for it and allowing people to share something and not have an answer, not have a solution, and just be willing to listen is sometimes as powerful as anything else. And really, again, for me, looking at where are those barriers and how can we lift those barriers and create organizational cultures where people can openly share problems, whether that's a safety issue or a personal issue that may be a barrier to performing your duties, equally important and makes the team better when we have an environment where we can do that. And so I think it just shifted, yeah, it definitely shifted my path, although I'm still working with organizations and leaders, and you just realize that common thread, whether it's, hey, how do I show up? How do I show up for myself, my team, and others? I share it through a lens of mental health often, but it's often the same key to organizational performance, success, culture, managing change. It's the same key for all those things.
So how did you bridge this over into speaking? So once you left, so what year did you leave? Did you leave just a year ago, 2 years?
2023,
Okay.
end of 2023 was when I was done. Yeah, so
And what was the catalyst for that? Was it just it was time or what kind of
it was
shifted?
time. It was time. To say that there weren't family aspects to it would be lying. I had a kid who was struggling through some stuff. I had my husband again was also active duty military, and sometimes I always say my gut instinct is something I follow, but I'm a highly analytical person, so there's 1,000 variables feeding that gut instinct at all times. And I just realized that stepping forward, I could make more impact in some of the spaces that were meaningful to me out of a uniform than I could in. And yeah, and my calculus for how I could serve and be there for my family, as well as the communities that I wanted to serve professionally, that path forward wasn't wearing a military uniform. And although I miss it dearly in a lot of ways, and I miss some of the grittier parts of what I did, I still get to be connected to those communities in different ways. So,
Oh, I
yeah,
can imagine. I mean, it's like a family, right? I mean,
it
you've
is.
got
Oh gosh,
probably
yeah.
a lot of people that you have worked with
Hmm.
over the years.
Yeah.
But so did you have any idea of what you wanted to do? Or was it more just based on purpose and you knew that it was going to kind of evolve as you
No.
walked toward it? No?
No, and it was like I had to strip down these layers of what was I leaning towards or researching because of other people's expectations? What was I looking at because of my own expectations for myself that were maybe driven by things that weren't my sense of purpose anymore, but just obligation? I couldn't answer the question in many cases. What were things I wanted to do versus is this just me meeting an expectation? And I think I had somebody tell me facing a big career transition, treat it like a research project. Do not ever let I had a coach and I'm a big proponent for coaches. And it was a coach I worked with for a bit. And he said, like, do not answer when people say, what do you want to do? Don't answer. Don't give them the courtesy of that answer because then you're creating expectation. And the answer is, I don't know, because I've been stuck in a military uniform and system that I am so grateful for, but it gives me so many blind spots. I don't know what's out there. I don't know what else exists. And until I try some things, learn some things, and explore the ecosystem, I can't answer that question. And if I had answered it with all the assumptions I had while wearing a uniform, I wouldn't be where I am today. And it would have been more comfortable and safe, probably, when we talk about being in those uncomfortable moments. I tried a lot of things, and there were things that I realized I was excited about when I saw them pop up on my calendar. There were things that I kind of just didn't want to see there anymore. And I started to just shift and tweak. And I had more of a portfolio of work than a typical W-2 job because my husband's job moved us across the country unexpectedly. So some of those life change things that I could have just been angry about because it definitely stepped me away from some things I thought I was supposed to do. Give it a few months and I was like, oh, I don't think I would have been fulfilled doing that anyway. And it kept leading me towards the things I was meant to do. It wasn't always pretty. And there were moments where I felt very uncomfortable in that transition. But then you look back, everybody says hindsight 2020, right? I go, that's why, like that one needed to be an aggressive band aid rip, or I never would have walked away from it,
That is
you
such a
know?
good way to put it. Yes. Well,
Oh,
and I mean, we always have to kind of fight that need to have all the answers right away. I
yeah.
mean, I can
Oh,
remember
yeah.
that of being like, I'm moving out of corporate. I got to move into something new, and what am I doing? And I've got to know within a because you're just so used to having
Yeah.
structure, and then
Oh
when
my
that's
gosh. Yeah.
gone, but now, so what?
Yeah.
What was the catalyst? What finally? Like,
Yeah.
and maybe it wasn't like you said. Maybe it wasn't a quick shift. It was kind of this gradual moving into it. But how did you get into the space, especially your speaking, which I love, and I think that is like such your true excellence is in speaking, because
Yeah.
I remember I
Oh,
told you
thank
I
you.
was watching you speak and I was like, "She's been speaking for years,
Oh, no.
clearly." But how did that come about? I mean, did you just start
It started with people asked me to, and I went, and it started in the mental health space truly because it was the space I would say yes to, because I always went, "Oh god, do I wanna stand on a stage with a microphone? No. But is this gonna help somebody? Yes." And so it was that gut instinct, it was that sense of purpose, like whatever your spirituality or meaning of life kinda stuff, I kept feeling in those moments I was meant to go do that thing to help somebody. That's where it started. I share actually a story often in one of my keynotes, sometimes when we're talking about change and insecurity and those fears that can kind of hold us back. I was a kid slash teenager slash adult who was terrified of public speaking and would avoid it. Oh my God. Like I was socially insecure. I had so many social anxieties. I would hold myself back from those social situations out of fear. And I look back now and see how much I missed. But I'll tell a story sometimes about my first day of work ever in a military uniform. I went from working as a waitress slash tool slinger at Home Depot slash caterer slash whatever, all these blue collar jobs, just working, to I was directly responsible for 120 people day one. And I had this amazing mentor, senior master sergeant, who technically worked for me, but was much more seasoned than I was, who kind of like stuck a door shut and went, okay, he didn't warn me. He shut the door, locked me in, and said, in 30 minutes, they're going to assemble everyone in a break room and they want to hear from you. Vision, leadership philosophy, and you are their leader. And I'm sitting there going, like, what? You know, yeah, I had 3.5 years of leadership training to prepare me for that, but I was not prepared for it. But he slowed down, he guided me through it. He helped me with what do I say? And then he stood there and he made me the leader. And I was grateful to have people like that throughout my career that I still have anxieties around public speaking. Every time I step on a stage, like that doesn't go away. I've been through some programs and some things to help develop myself as a speaker in meaningful ways, where it's like, oh, once you strip down all those layers of what are you supposed to look like, and you're just yourself and you're sharing things that can help serve others. I think for me, crossing those streams, I was being asked to speak in a mental health lane. And then I had joined a team and was being asked to help develop leaders, which I was very comfortable doing because I had spent decades developing leaders, but they were like separate to me for a long time. And then when I stepped back and I did some writing and I did some work to realize that my purpose is to cross those streams, and my purpose is not to go talk about mental health to leaders, but it's to help strip down those layers and help people step into things as that best version of themselves using some of those stories, but also helping people realize that's not just a separate subject. It's what holds us back in so many ways. And it's not just I had a mental health thing and that whatever. It was no, I was holding back and I wasn't leaning on others and I wasn't being true to myself. That was another hard, scary thing to step into the world and say, hey, this isn't me doing this or this. Like we're crossing those streams now. That was terrifying. Fear of judgment, fear of all those things. Yeah.
but that, like, as you said, though, once you have that awareness, it's like, "Oh, okay, this is where it all
Oh,
threads
yeah.
through together." And but I
Yeah.
think that's the part that when you think of leadership, because I know in my coaching career, I've had those moments where people really have an aha moment, and these are leaders that they have been in roles for many, many years, and it's sometimes the basics of kind of just connecting the dots on certain things that can make people much stronger leaders, and it's just blind spots. It's kind of what you said earlier. It's just these blind spots that you have to but I think so once you started to do that, right? You started to go into speaking. How did I mean, obviously that felt like, okay, this is more of a flow. Are you now going into organizations? Like, who do you work with now more than, or is it a mixed bag?
It's a mixed bag, and for me, I like that it's a mixed bag because I think I'll work with individuals, whether that's in a coaching, leadership capacity or advising in other ways. I love working with teams and organizations because for me, I do a lot of research and work in the space of psychological safety and team culture. There's something really beautiful about helping somebody follow through on that and create and see a shift in culture, which takes time. And I work with the team Victory Strategies in the leadership space, and we get to do a lot of work with some pretty cool organizations and teams, you name it, no specific industry. And then sometimes I get to work as an advisor and put the technical hat on and talk about, other things that give me passion in all of those spaces. And then I get to stand on stages. It's always the last thing I share. And I go, it's this big thing. And I think those are those moments where I go, here I am just sharing things on a stage, and when we get to actually have the conversation afterwards, if it's a fireside chat, or I do a lot of work in the virtual space where people feel like, oh, we can't build culture, we can't connect. Showing people how to do that in a virtual space is one of my passions. I love showing people that a hybrid workforce can still have that feeling that you can have face to face. And in all of those contexts, it's helping people turn those light bulbs on and make a mindset shift. And again, that the theme of change and uncertainty is one of the things I get to ask to work with teams on the most. And that's not mental health, but we're talking about that same thing that holds us back in those moments when there's a lot of risk. I do a lot of work in risk management and mitigation. That same aspect of holding ourselves back and learning, having that learned behavior to hold back and not share those things that are critical to the team and not be open about the issues that we're facing. That's the Achilles heel individually and in a team and in a culture. And so I love having a bit of all of it because I think it's a different, being able to guide an individual in how to navigate those spaces and how to navigate change is a beautiful thing. But I love, I was an athlete growing up. That's part of what led me towards the military. Being able to work with teams is something I'm truly passionate about and love every chance I get to do that.
Well, working with teams is great too when you can see those shifts happening in real time. Isn't that, I mean, there's nothing like it. There is nothing like it. Yeah.
It's nothing like it. Yeah.
Well, now tell me what's coming up next for you? What's happening this year? Anything exciting? Any new things you're stepping into?
I mean, I'm doing a lot of writing because
Yeah.
there are some books in my future. One in particular that I don't know timeline, but it'll be something that I focus on a lot this year. Speaking and again, finding ways to engage teams in the virtual space is something I'm very passionate about, and we're finding a lot of teams don't have the bandwidth at the time or they're not co-located, and so finding ways to bring people together and show them what this can look like and really work with them in the virtual space is something I really enjoy. And then yeah, getting on those stages where it's intentional. uh, I I won't be specific, but I'm working with a team right now where I'm going to get to stand on a stage with them next year, and they're spending an entire year developing their agenda and how to work with their teams because they want to engage these teams and these attendees with each other leading up to this amazing conference that's focused on culture. I go, man, what an incredible way to do that. And so when I find those organizations that really want to be intentional with it, I absolutely love that. And again, we're moving to the West Coast to California, so I look forward to finding those teams out on the West Coast that I can be close with and spend some in-person time with. I still travel and I will continue to travel, but I love finding ways to get close to home and really find those teams I can spend some intentional time with as well and help shift those cultures. So it'll continue to be a mixed bag. And I also do a lot of work in the veteran space. I will never not be working in that space to help give back and help see how we can continue that culture shift on that side of the house.
I love what you do because it's it's tangible. It's tangible results that you're
Yeah.
creating, and it's important and interesting work. I mean, it really is. And I
Yeah.
think it's an expansion of what you've been doing all your life. It's just getting more and more amplified the more you step into it, which is amazing. Well, we're
Absolutely.
going to share all of Strike's links on the show notes so everybody can reach out to her, whoever wants to learn more about what she's up to. But Strike, thank you so much for taking the time and talking with us today, because it's what you do is just, it's pretty amazing. And I really wish you the best of luck moving forward. And we're going to keep in touch so I can kind of see where you're going with all of this, because you're fun to watch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for creating space for these conversations. Change is hard. Change is messy, but it is the pathway to the good stuff. So, yeah, keep having these conversations. I know it means a lot to those that are watching and listening.
Thank you. That's it for now. Until next time. Thank you for listening to The Change Effect. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review if you enjoyed this episode, so more women like you can find us and take their next step toward creating a life they love.